You know, what happens when the one thing that gives life to millions also becomes the very thing that divides them? Yeah, we're talking about water. In this explainer, we're going to dive into how this absolutely essential resource can actually turn into a source of intense, and I mean intense, international conflict.
So get this, we're going to see how one single, massive engineering project managed to turn a shared, life-giving river system into this bitter, drawn-out international dispute. The big question we're trying to answer here is pretty simple. How on earth did it all go so wrong?
Okay, so our story, it all centers on two of the most famous rivers in history, right? The Tigris and the Euphrates. I mean, we're talking about the cradle of civilization here. For thousands of years, they've been the absolute lifeblood of the region. But today, they're a shared resource connecting three modern nations, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq.
And this setup, it creates what experts call a transboundary river. Now, it's a simple idea, but it is absolutely crucial to understanding this whole situation. Think about it. Water doesn't recognize our maps, right? It just flows. It crosses borders. And that means multiple countries end up depending on the exact same supply of water. And that, right there, is where things start to get, well, really complicated.
So let's actually trace the path of the water for a second. The journey begins way up high in the mountains of Turkey. From there, it flows south, first crossing into Syria, and then it keeps on going down into Iraq. Now, this creates a natural power dynamic. Turkey is the upstream country, and Syria and Iraq are downstream. You got to remember that, okay? Because it is the key to this entire story.
All right, so then, in the 1970s, Turkey, the upstream nation, remember, launches this incredibly ambitious plan. It's called the Southeastern Anatolia Project, or GAP for short. And this, right here, this was the moment a huge stone was dropped into that river, sending out ripples that would be felt for decades to come.
So you're probably wondering, just how big was this project? Well, let's just look at the raw numbers. First up, a whopping 22 dams.
Then, on top of that, 19 hydroelectric power plants built to generate massive amounts of energy.
And get this, just one of those dams, the Ataturk Dam, can store 48 billion cubic meters of water. To put that in perspective, that makes it one of the largest dams in all of Europe. The sheer scale and ambition here, it was just monumental. Now, from Turkey's point of view, the GAP project was a massive win. I mean, you can see why, right? It was all about national development. It meant clean hydroelectric power, which meant less reliance on fossil fuels. It meant irrigating vast, dry plains to boost food production. And hey, it created jobs in a part of the country that really needed them. For Turkey, this wasn't a controversy. It was simply progress.
But you knew there was a but, right? That stone dropped in the water, it created its first major ripple downstream. And man, it hit Syria hard.
So the whole conflict went from being kind of theoretical to being very, very real in January 1990. See, to fill that massive reservoir for the new Ataturk Dam, Turkey had to drastically reduce the flow of the Euphrates River. For Syria, this wasn't some abstract political issue anymore. No way. It was a full-blown crisis. It was like the tap was suddenly turned way, way down and regional tensions just shot up almost overnight.
And the impact on Syria was immediate and just severe. They saw this dramatic drop in water levels, which threatened everything. And I mean everything, from their drinking water supply to their ability to irrigate farms and generate their own power. You have to understand, that country's entire economy is so deeply dependent on that river.
And that ripple? Oh, it didn't stop in Syria. It kept on going, continuing its journey south, widening and becoming even more damaging by the time it reached the final nation on the river's path, Iraq.
Now, Iraq's vulnerability here is pretty unique. You see, they're at the very end of the line. The water that reaches them has already passed through Turkey, which controls the source, and through Syria. This makes them doubly susceptible to whatever the countries upstream decide to do.
So for Iraq, the consequences are just compounded. They face these declining river flows, leading to severe water shortages. This has absolutely crippled their agricultural sector, and has even led to desertification, and that's where fertile land literally turns to dust. It's a really tragic story of profound and growing water insecurity.
Okay, so as if this whole situation wasn't tense enough already, there are two other massive forces at play here, making an already difficult problem even worse for literally everyone involved.
Factor number one, climate change. The entire region is just getting hotter and drier. What does that mean? Well, it means less rainfall feeding the rivers at their source, and more water just evaporating along the way. So in short, the total amount of water that everyone has to share is shrinking.
Year after year, the pie gets smaller.
And factor number 2? Population growth. So while the water supply is shrinking, the demand is just exploding. The populations of all 3 of these countries are rising, which means more people need more water for drinking, for farming, for industry, you name it. It's a classic and really dangerous squeeze, rising demand meeting a falling supply.
So, what does all of this add up to? Well, it brings us to the core idea of this entire story, a field of study known as hydropolitics.
Hydropolitics is, pretty simply, the politics of water. It's what happens when a river crosses a border. It creates tension, it forces negotiations, and it reveals this fundamental inequality of who has the control. The story of Turkey's GAP project, it's a textbook example of hydropolitics in action.
Let's just boil it all down to this one fundamental dynamic. On one side, you've got upstream power. Turkey controls the headwaters, giving it the ability to regulate the flow for its own national development. But on the other side, you've got downstream vulnerability. Syria and Iraq are left totally dependent on decisions made hundreds of miles away, and that creates this constant economic and social insecurity.
And all of this, it leaves us with this central dilemma that's really at the heart of so many global resource conflicts. And it's a question with no easy answer, but it's one that's only going to become more urgent in our warming, more crowded world. And that question is this: when a river crosses a border, who truly owns the water?